I'm a female and this story took place about 4 years ago. I was at Walmart shopping. Back then I went there all the time. On this day I was only getting like 2 or 3 things. It was nighttime. The store was somewhat busy though. I was able to find what I needed pretty easily, and I spent a total of maybe 10 minutes inside the store. At one point though, a man came up seemingly out of nowhere and introduced himself to me. He was about 5 and had grayish hair. He asked me my name and what I was shopping for. I saw that he didn't work there and he came across to me as a little strange. I spoke with the man for maybe a minute, but I told him that I had to leave. He was sort of creeping me out. When I walked away, I headed straight for the checkouts, and when I got there I saw that there was only 2 other people in the self-checkout area that had maybe 6 registers. I went to one and began scanning my items. That's when I saw the man again. It looked as though he had followed me all the way from the aisle we were in together, and that aisle was on the whole other end of the store. When he got to the self-checkouts, he did not go to an open one. Instead, he walked straight up to me. Then he offered to pay for my items that I was getting. I told the man no thanks and I asked him why he wanted to do that. He said he was just trying to be nice and I said thanks, but I would buy it for myself. Then the man walked away, but he wasn't buying anything at all. He just seemed to walk out and leave the store. I finished checking out and then walked away to leave. When I got outside, the first thing I saw was the man standing there. He said hi to me once again. It scared me, but I said hi. The man asked if I wanted to come over to his house. It was really awkward. I told him sorry, but no, and I started walking away. At first, the man took a couple of steps towards me and was walking with me, but after about 5 seconds or so, he stopped. He did not continue to follow me, and I got to my car and drove home. This experience was creepy and should have been enough for me to not go back to that Walmart, but I thought it wasn't that big of a deal, so this guy was a bit of a creep. So what? I continued to go back to that Walmart. I went there several more times with no problems. Probably about a month after this had happened though, I was shopping at the same Walmart once again. I was doing some grocery shopping and it was like 8 p.m. I was in one of the first food aisles of the store and I noticed the man was there again. When I first saw him, I recognized him, but had actually forgotten about what had happened. I didn't know where I had seen him before at first, and it took my brain about 5 seconds to remember. When I did, I knew I needed to get out of there. As I was starting to walk away, I saw him look up and notice me. I left the aisle and walked as far away from him as I could to the complete other end of the store. I still had a couple of more things to get in the grocery department, but I wanted to wait until the man was gone. Running into him again was something I needed to avoid doing. In the meantime, I started just looking around at random items on the side of the store that I was now on. There were far less shoppers over there, and it was quiet. I slowly walked down a few aisles, just kind of taking my time. As I was doing so, I noticed the man again. He seemed to be heading in my direction, but was still really far away. I knew that I had to get out of there. I started walking away as fast as I could, and I went down different aisles to block myself from the man's view. I just set my basket with several items in it on the ground and then left the store. There was no way I would have been able to check out without the man catching up to me. Once I left the store, I drove back home. After that, I did not return to that particular Walmart for some time. I believe that it was a total coincidence that I saw the man again there that night, but when he saw me, he was going to try to talk to me again for sure. He must shop there a lot, and I'm just glad that since then I have never seen the guy. I've never been one for parties, even in college. I got sick of the whole going out culture pretty quickly, and I found that I always had more fun doing something meaningful with a few close friends. I'm from a rural area, northwestern Ontario. This happened a couple years ago. Ever since I was a kid, my dad and his buddies had a New Year's Eve tradition of going ice fishing, while everyone else was celebrating the new year however they celebrated. My mom wasn't really in the picture, and we didn't have much extended family, so I grew up spending New Year's Eve on a frozen lake in the frigid cold with my dad, his brother, my brother, and my dad's friends. My dad isn't around anymore, and my brother moved to Chicago a number of years ago, but I still try and go ice fishing as much as possible, especially as a way to celebrate New Year's Eve. I'm not really sure why, I just feel like I have some kind of obligation to keep the tradition going. My 2 best friends, Nate and Trevor, are pretty rugged guys themselves. You know the type, those burly, lumberjack-looking dudes that seem more in touch with wilderness than society? That's honestly how I describe myself too. Anyway, the three of us tried to keep the tradition alive as best we could, which was great because spending New Year's Eve alone would be depressing as hell. Nate was the one driving that day. His truck was perfect for the job. Big tires, four-wheel drive, and enough room in the back for all of our gear. We packed everything we needed. Rods, tip-ups, bait, a sled to haul everything, and a small pop-up shelter to shield us from the worst of the cold. The forecast predicted a clear night, but in Ontario, you never trust the weather reports entirely. We were prepared for anything. At least we thought we were. The lake we were heading to wasn't a well-known spot, and that's what we loved about it. It was tucked away, surrounded by thick trees with a surface that stayed frozen solid even in the milder parts of winter. It wasn't a place you'd stumble across unless you knew exactly where to look. As Nate navigated the snowy backroads, the excitement started to build. There's something about the quiet stillness of ice fishing. Just you, your friends, and the promise of the catch. Definitely beats drinking beer after beer at some random bar. As we pulled up to park near the trailhead, I noticed someone standing nearby. He was a few yards away, bundled up in heavy winter gear, but something about him didn't feel right. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at our truck. At first, I thought maybe he was just a fellow angler sizing us up, but then I saw him glance down at his phone, then back at us, then back at his phone again. For some reason, it didn't feel casual. I don't really know how to explain it, it just felt off. I muttered to my friends that guy was creeping me out. The two of them looked up. Trevor shrugged his shoulders and Nate nodded, but didn't say anything. We were about to start unloading when the man suddenly rushed towards us, waving his arms wildly. I rolled the window down to hear what he was saying. He started screaming that we needed to come help him immediately, and that his buddy had just fallen through the ice. He pointed at his phone, saying the other guy they were with just told him. He sounded frantic, and his desperation was definitely real. He didn't even think. Trevor opened his door, and then we were all out following the man as he took off down the trail toward the lake. We didn't stop to grab anything, not even our coats. The urgency in his voice was enough to override any second thoughts. The man was practically sprinting, and we had to jog to keep up. As we got closer to the lake, I started to notice something that didn't sit right. He wasn't leading us to the usual fishing spots. Instead, we were heading toward a more remote part of the shoreline, away from where the ice was thickest. I was about to stop following, but it was too late. They appeared in view before we could do anything. Two more men standing near the edge of the lake. They weren't dressed for fishing, and they weren't moving. They were just standing there, waiting. I glanced down at their hands. They were both armed. My blood ran cold. One of them yelled at us to stop right there as we approached. He raised his gun and pointed it directly at me. I honestly can't describe the feeling that you get when someone points a gun at you. I hope no one ever has to experience what I felt that day. My heart dropped as the man we'd been following turned to face us, a smirk creeping across his face. We'd been set up. The second guy demanded Nate's keys, along with everything we had on our persons. We didn't really have a choice. These guys didn't seem like they were messing around. Nate reached into his pocket and tossed the truck keys to the man, and the three of us emptied our pockets. I tried to hang onto my phone, but one of the men told me phones too. Nate said his was in the car, which they laughed about. I've never been more furious in my life. How could we have been so foolish? I clenched my fists, wishing those guys weren't armed. I would have taken all of them on. Within moments, they grabbed everything and walked us back up the path at gunpoint before one of the men sped off in Nate's car. The other two backed away into the woods, presumably to their own vehicle. I debated following them, but I figured that wouldn't be much help. We stood there for a moment, shivering, before Nate pulled out his phone. I knew he had lied about it being in the car. I honestly don't know what we would have done had he not thought quickly on his feet. Somehow we still had service. He called the police, explaining everything as calmly as he could. The dispatcher told us to stay put, and we huddled together for warmth as we waited for help to arrive. I was still so unbelievably angry. Nate was the worst, though. He kept kicking nearby trees and cursing at the top of his lungs. There was nothing Trevor or I could do to calm him down. The whole thing had happened so fast. I was honestly still processing it all. Why the hell would there be people out in the middle of nowhere on New Year's Eve of all days? It didn't make any sense. I'll skip all the boring details. The cops took an official report and were gracious enough to drive us all back to Trevor's house, which was the closest. As you might expect, Nate's car was never located, and those people were never caught. The three of us still can't believe what had happened. Trevor thinks we just stumbled into the wrong people at the wrong time, that they weren't planning on robbing us, but we just so happened to be the perfect targets. I think that's possible, but it still feels so unlikely. Who just springs a trap on some random people in the spur of the moment? But it also wouldn't make sense for them to be waiting for us at such a secluded spot. They had no guarantee anyone would show up. I really have no idea what to make of this whole incident. I work at a convenience store at the corner of a small shopping strip. It's basically a smaller, local version of a 7-Eleven. I worked morning shifts for a while, which started at 3 a.m. and ended at 1 p.m. I agreed to these shifts because they were always the slowest and required the least amount of work. All the parts of my job included tending to customers, filling the shelves, and taking out the trash, which pretty much meant I had nothing to do. It was the middle of winter at the time this happened, but I live in a warmer state, so it usually rains instead of snows. It was a light pour outside, but it was enough to keep most people away. On early mornings like these, I like to lean against the front of the building outside and smoke to pass the time. I wasn't supposed to, but there wasn't anyone to stop me. Along the shopping strip were maybe 8 or 9 other stores connected to ours. All of them were stores with normal hours, so none of them were ever open until around 6 or 7 in the morning. So when I saw a car pull into the parking lot while I was smoking outside, I of course assumed they were coming to the convenience store. I burned out my cigarette and tossed it in the trash, then headed back inside and around the corner. There really was nothing to do, so I was just waiting for the customer to come in and leave so I could get back to being bored alone. After a few minutes of nobody coming in though, I walked back around the corner and checked outside the door. The car was still there, parked in a parking space nearby, but the headlights were off, and as far as I could tell, nobody was inside. Again, it was lightly raining outside and all the other stores were still closed, so I was a bit confused as to where they went. I took one last look around, seeing nobody, then closed the door and went back inside. 30 more minutes of nothing went by, and I think I was just standing in the same spot behind the counter for the whole time, spacing out. I checked the time, seeing I'd only been at work for a little over an hour, and decided I should check the trash cans around the store and toss them in the dumpster out back. I walked around to each trash bin, putting the bag in the cart and replacing it with a new bag. As I was doing this, I heard a faint click sound come from outside. It sounded like something snapping or breaking, but between the rain hitting the roof and the sound being somewhat far away, it was impossible to tell what it was or where exactly it came from. In the moment it happened, though, I barely even thought about it. It just didn't seem like anything worth thinking about. Just another random sound these old buildings made. Once I filled the cart with all the trash bags, I rolled it into the back room and unlocked the back door that led to the dumpster. I sighed, seeing as the rain was pouring down harder now, of course, right when I actually needed to go outside. Regardless, I pushed the cart through the rain and over to the dumpster, which was directly across from the door. After tossing in all the trash, I turned back and started heading for the door, but I noticed something was out of place. The store directly connected to mine had its door wedged open. I'd never seen anyone there earlier than 6, so it made me think. I went back inside to get out of the rain and went out to the front door and looked at the other store's door. All the lights were off, and it looked locked up and empty like it always was at this time. I thought for a few more minutes before figuring I had nothing better to do and went back outside by the dumpster and walked up to the open door. Again, all the lights were off, but it seemed to lead into a small closet-type room, which then had another door, probably leading to the main storeroom. I stepped inside, standing in between the doorway so as to not make it seem like I was trying to sneak in or something. Standing inside now, I could hear someone moving around in the other room, walking, opening drawers. It sounded like they were making a mess, which then got me thinking even more. I called out, hoping to get a reassuring response from a neighboring store worker. The noises stopped. I waited a few seconds before I realized that this was not normal and something was definitely wrong. I stepped back outside and into the rain. As I quickly made my way back to my store, I recognized something was missing from the door I had just left. It took a second to figure it out, but then I saw that there was no handle. It was just an empty hole where the handle and lock usually are. Then I looked down at the wedge that was holding the door open, seeing now that it was actually the broken door handle. I ran back into my store, locking all the doors, and called 911, as well as my store manager. Once I knew they were on their way, I went up to the wall connecting our stores and put my ear against it, listening to the suspected robbery taking place. Whoever it was had to have known that I called the police, because they were moving quickly now, running all around, tossing or knocking things over. After 30 seconds to a minute of this, I saw lights flash outside and heard sirens approaching the back of the building. The footsteps quickly moved to the back of the store before a bunch of loud yelling came, which I assume was the officers. I checked out the back door after a minute, seeing a less hectic scene, and walked out to talk to the officers. I thanked them for coming so quickly and gave them a statement. The man who was arrested was found with a pillowcase full of nearly $6,000 worth of stolen items. He also had an empty firearm, along with a variety of tools used to break down doors and locks, and unknowing to me, he'd also broken into the store 2 spots down as well. It's unclear whether or not the man knew I was working at the time, but my store lights were on, so it isn't likely that he would have broken into my store. But several large scratches were found on the back of our door handle, which may have been from a previous attempt